I'm Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and this is Ukraine, the latest. Today, on the military front, Russian forces move forward in Kursk oblast and close in on the town of Sudzha, while Ukraine hits another oil refinery in Russia's Samara oblast, and Ukrainian troops make some small advances in the Donbas. Meanwhile, we hear how France's commitment to defense has played out domestically, and we look ahead to several military and defense meetings happening in Paris this week. Later, we'll hear an interview with the Governor of Kherson's oblast, Oleksandr Prokudin, and we dive into the murky world of a Bulgarian spy ring operating in the UK on behalf of the Kremlin.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
It's the worst carnage that this world has seen since World War II.
Absolutely fascinating.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We're strong. We're Ukrainians.
It's Monday, the 10th of March, 3 years and 15 days since the full-scale invasion began. I'm joined by Associate Editor for Defense Dom Nicholls, and joining us live from Paris, Marion Solletty, Editor-at-Large at Politico in France. But first, over to you, Dom. Can you catch us up on the latest military developments?
So, as expected, the weekend saw Russia continue pressing Ukrainian positions in Kursk oblast extremely hard. They've accelerated their efforts in the last couple of weeks in an attempt to clear out all Ukrainian troops from Russia before any negotiations start. Now, this resulted over the weekend in the northern area of the Ukrainian lodgement being blunted. Now, I was talking last week in terms of the Kursk area having a northwest and a northeast flank. Well, that has now been rounded off, basically, and pushed south a bit, such that the front line to the north of Sudzha is now about 10 kilometres away from the city itself. However, it doesn't look like Russian forces have managed to cut off the southern chunk of Ukrainian troops. You may remember last week, Russia pushed through from the east and almost reached the border, a move that would have cut off a roughly 4 kilometre by 4 kilometre square piece of Russian land still held by Ukrainian forces. Now, I made the point that these troops would still have the border with Ukraine to their rear, so it wasn't as if they were in any huge danger of being surrounded, but a collapsing line and withdrawal of troops in contact with the enemy, or withdrawing in good order, as that's all going on, making sure it doesn't descend into a rout, is perhaps the most challenging of all ground force operations. Anyway, it looks like that Russian push did not get as far as the border, thereby cutting off that southern grouping. The town of Sudzha is under pressure from the east and the south. It still seems to be firmly in Ukrainian hands, but Russia does seem to be able to fire into it. Some Russian mill bloggers reported over the weekend that some elements have made it into the industrial zone. Another said Russian troops have made it over the river that runs north to south through the far eastern edge of the city. Now, both of those reports are unverified. They may indeed be true, and we will probably start to see Russian propaganda videos of flags being raised on top of buildings in some areas. But if those elements are there in Sudzha, I doubt they are in any great numbers, and I doubt they've got armoured vehicles and what have you. I think they may well be just sort of small reconnaissance parties that have possibly got in, got a photo and got out, or they may have stayed. It's a very confusing situation. Now, Ukrainian sources told the Ukrainian outlet Suspilna yesterday that up to 2 battalions of North Korean forces were operating near Sudzha, and they appear to be better trained and, quote, acting more coherently. British MOD this morning said in a tweet that Ukraine now holds about 300 square kilometres of land in Kursk. Now, the Institute for the Study of War, the US-based think tank, say that as part of the operation to collapse the Ukrainian-held salient in Kursk, Russian forces have pushed across the border and into Ukraine's Sumy Oblast, just to the west of those Ukrainian-held positions in the vicinity of Sudzha. Geolocated footage published on Saturday shows Russian forces had seized Novenke. That's 1 kilometre over the border. State Border Guard spokesperson Andrei Demchenko said on national TV last night, "These are small assault units composed of a few people. They try to penetrate our territory, accumulate forces and advance further into Ukraine, probably to cut off logistical routes." Then a Ukrainian soldier operating also in Kursk said Russian forces had advanced south of Sudzha due to support from North Korean forces and the massive use of FPV, first-person view drones with fibre optic cables. The fibre optic cables is important. That makes it very, very hard to bring the drones down in any other way than by shooting at them, basically, because the control signal is not over the air. It's not a radio wave, so you can't hit that with electronic warfare. It's literally a fibre optic cable spooling out the back of the drone for many kilometres in places. And that makes it much, much harder for the Ukrainians to bring them down, as it is also for Russians trying to bring down Ukrainian fibre optic controlled FPV drones. Now, we should note the assessment by ISW, and one that I agree with, says that a direct link between the suspension last week of US intelligence sharing, which was thought to come into effect last Wednesday, I think, and the loss of these positions in Ukraine's salient in Kursk, is unclear. There's no direct link between the two. ISW note that Kremlin officials said they should take advantage of the suspension of US military aid and intelligence sharing to, quote, inflict maximum damage to Ukrainian forces on the ground during the potentially limited time before a possible future resumption of that aid. I think that was Dmitry Medvedev, wasn't it? Anyway, so we know they're trying, but I would doubt the withdrawal of US intelligence assistance would have such an immediate tactical impact. I think Russian advances in the Kursk area are more likely down to the waves of meat assaults, North Koreans, and Putin's desperation to clear out Kyiv's forces ahead of any negotiations. The recent daily casualties have been well over 1,000, and I'll say more about the response to this withdrawal of US support in a short while. Down into Ukraine then, and there's been very little move to the front line. It's worth noting that Ukraine has made confirmed advances, albeit very small ones, in the vicinity of Kupiansk, Toretsk, Pokrovsk and Chasiv Yar in the Donbas. British MOD said today in their tweet that increased Ukrainian advances around Pokrovsk, in particular through the use of FPV drones, has been because they've been hitting Russian logistics supply lines. Now, as an indication of how important FPV drones are now considered, Ukraine's defence ministry said this morning that they are announcing plans to buy 4.5 million FPV drones, just FPV, 4.5 million FPVs this year as part of the effort to massively equip the military with advanced technology. Now, that total cost is expected to be about 110 billion hryvnia, that's about 2.6 billion US dollars. And for comparison, in 2023, Ukraine bought several thousand drones. That went up to 1.5 million last year. So to go up to 4.5 million this year is quite a step. They have been accelerating the production also of long-range missile drone hybrids. President Zelensky, we know, has set the Ukrainian Defence Procurement Agency a target of 30,000 long-range drones for this year. Speaking of which, Ukrainian drones hit another Russian oil refinery last night, this one in Russia's Samara oblast, about 800 kilometres east of Ukraine. Drones from the HUR, Ukraine's military intelligence, hit the plant in a town that I've been struggling to pronounce all morning. So I'm going to have another go here. Novoshkaibishevsk. Right, there you go. Anyway, a town with a name that sounds like a fly trapped against a window, and hat tip to the late, great Clive James for that one. It was hit last night. Andrei Kovalenko, the head of Ukraine's Centre for Countering Disinformation, said that it was one of the 10 largest refineries in Russia and one that produces gasoline, diesel, fuel and fuel oil, which he said are critically important for transport and military equipment. We know the plant produces jet fuel for the Su-27 fighters and Tu-22 bombers, the big Tupolev bombers, and it was previously attacked at least twice in March last year. So they've still got no air defence in place because there's not a lot of it left and it's being prioritised elsewhere, like Moscow and so on. More evidence, I would suggest, of how exhausted materially, Russia is, no matter what narrative they, or quite frankly, the White House, try to sell us. And no, I didn't expect to be making a comment like that during this war either. Anyway, so how has Europe responded to the withdrawal of US support last week? French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu, speaking on Saturday, said France will use accrued interest from frozen Russian assets to give Ukraine 195 million euros, just over 210 million US dollars. He said the funds will go towards supplying France's delivery of 155mm artillery shells and Hammer missiles. Now, Hammer standing for Highly Agile Modular Munition Extended Range. It's basically a really funky air-launched missile that comes off the rails of a French Mirage 2000. Now, also, I think we missed this, but last Thursday, Norway's parliament agreed to increase military aid to Ukraine to 85 billion Norwegian kroner. That's just short of 8 billion US dollars for this year. Now, that is almost a threefold increase from the pledge they made last November of roughly 35 billion Norwegian kroner. Also over the weekend, the provision of technical support to Ukraine raised temperatures. In a slightly threatening tweet, Elon Musk said his Starlink system was, quote, the backbone of the Ukrainian army. Their entire front line would collapse if I turned it off. Now, that made Radoslaw Sikorski, Poland's foreign minister, reply, Starlinks for Ukraine are paid for by the Polish Digitization Ministry at the cost of about $50 million per year. The ethics of threatening the victim of aggression apart, if SpaceX proves to be an unreliable provider, we will be forced to look for other suppliers. Then, responding to that, Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, tweeted, just making things up. No one has made any threats about cutting Ukraine off from Starlink, and say thank you, because without Starlink, Ukraine would have lost this war long ago and Russians would be on the border with Poland right now. Okay, number one. Elon Musk did threaten to turn Starlink off, or at least made a very unnecessary and passive-aggressive comment about his ability to do so. And number two, what is it with you White House guys and this pathological need to be thanked all the time? Anyway, is the US Secretary of State demanding Poland's foreign minister to say thank you in public on Twitter a grown-up way of doing business, I would ask. Poland, by the way, currently the biggest defence spender in NATO and spending 44% more on defence by GDP than the United States. So go on, you pick a fight with Poland. Anyway, in response to losing access to Maxar, that's the commercial company, Maxar satellite imagery, ISW say Ukraine's European partners may be able to independently supply commercially available satellite imagery to Ukraine. The Financial Times reported on Saturday that Anders Linda, who's the head of the international division of Maxar Technologies, said that any commercial customers, including US allies and partners, can use the data that they purchase from Maxar however they see fit, including by sharing it with allies such as Ukraine. So maybe it won't be such a... maybe they'll get the images anyway. Okay, next one for me, just on the sort of military side of life. Ish. Former British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak commented over the weekend on the potential use of Russia's frozen assets, about $300 billion worth of which are held in the West, $200 billion of that in Europe. Now, Rishi Sunak said Russia's invasion of Ukraine has caused $524 billion in destruction. It's very specific. Devastating cities, industries and lives. Seizing the money would accelerate Ukraine's reconstruction, relieve pressure on allied budgets and send an unmistakable message that aggression will not pay. Some claim seizing these assets would violate international law, but experts, including those at the Hoover Institution, have outlined legal pathways to do so. The West already uses the interest from these assets to help Ukraine. If that's legal, then so is using the capital itself. The principle is clear. If you destroy another nation, you should pay for the damage. The message is simple. If we let Russia off the hook, we set a dangerous precedent for other aggressors. That is why we must act. Okay, good words from Rishi there. I do hope it lands well in Whitehall. That's us up to date, Adélie, with the sort of the hard edge, the heavy metal side of what's going on at the moment. I just wonder if you've got any comebacks on that before I start on the political and diplomatic front.
Please tell us all there is to know about the political front.
Well, guess what? It's another big week for diplomacy. So first, this morning, Moscow said it had stripped the accreditation of 2 British nationals linked to the British embassy in Russia, accusing them of espionage and subversive activities and ordering them to leave within 2 weeks. The Foreign Office here in London has rejected the claim that 2 members of staff had engaged in spying, and a Foreign Office spokesman said this is not the first time that Russia has made malicious and baseless accusations against our staff. Now, the embassy's second secretary and the husband of the first secretary were expelled for performing counterintelligence work, according to Russia's state-run TASS news agency. Okay, so this is still Monday, right? Also today, President Zelensky is travelling to Saudi Arabia for talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Officials from Ukraine and the US will then meet tomorrow and Wednesday. There's substantial talks, I think, happening Wednesday, maybe late tomorrow, in Jeddah on the Red Sea. Ukrainian officials are expected to use the meeting to express their commitment to a ceasefire in exchange for the resumption of US intelligence and military aid, and that minerals deal is also likely to be signed, although it's not sure who, where and when that will happen, because President Zelensky is not going to be joining the meetings between officials tomorrow and Wednesday. Speaking to reporters last night, Donald Trump said the US had just about restored intelligence sharing with Ukraine, a fairly meaningless phrase, but one that suggests he thinks the deal and talks in general are going his way, although there's no guarantee it won't end in disaster like in the Oval Office. But asked if he would consider ending the halt on intelligence sharing, Mr. Trump said, We just about have. We're going to make a lot of progress, I believe, this week. That's regarding the talks in Saudi Arabia. Ahead of those talks, President Zelensky said Russia is the only reason there is no peace in Ukraine. He said Ukraine has been seeking peace since the very first second of the war, and we have always said that the only reason the war is continuing is because of Russia. A Ukrainian official said earlier today that Kyiv will propose an aerial and naval ceasefire during tomorrow's talks. We do have a proposal for a ceasefire in the sky and ceasefire at sea, the official said, because these are the ceasefire options that are easy to install and to monitor, and it's possible to start with them. Okay, then on to the next big events of the week. Tomorrow, Tuesday, France will host talks with military chiefs of staff whose nations are ready to offer Ukraine military support after any peace deal. So this is likely to be a kind of show and tell by armed forces chiefs, with them expected to come clean about how many troops, what kind of capabilities, what readiness for how long, all that kind of stuff they could stump up as part of the coalition of the willing. Then on Wednesday, the defence ministers from Europe's 5 main military powers will meet in Paris. That's France, Germany, Italy, Poland and the UK. That's likely to include NATO and EU officials as well for 2 meetings, one focused on Ukraine and the other focused on wider European defence. Now, AFP, quoting a source close to French Defence Minister Sébastien Lecornu, said, in view of a recent American decision to suspend military aid to Ukraine, the ministers will discuss coordinating action of our countries in support of Kyiv. Now, rest assured, Adélie, we'll have our best man on the case in Paris. Then, finally, as a bit of a look ahead, British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, he's going to lead a second meeting of the Coalition of the Willing this coming weekend. The Prime Minister's official spokesman told reporters this morning the Prime Minister is to host a second leaders meeting of the Coalition of the Willing. I just said that. It will be a virtual meeting. We're expecting that on Saturday. It will build on the summit from Lancaster House, but the exact cast list will be confirmed. However, colleagues of ours here at the paper understand that around 20 countries are expected to take part in those talks. The spokesman continued, obviously, these discussions are live, but clearly all those involved in discussions are interested in exploring exactly what they're able to contribute, which is what officials say when they haven't got anything to say. So another busy week in prospect, Adélie, but we are briefly up to date.
Thank you, Dom. That's quite a marathon you're doing for us these days, doing both the political and the military updates. Looking forward to having you in Paris later this week. We're going to stay on the other side of the channel today with the first installment of The View from Paris, with joining us today Marion Solletty, who's the editor-at-large at Politico in Paris. Marion, bonjour et bienvenue.
Hi Adélie, bonjour.
Thank you so much for joining us. So let's do a bit of a deep dive into the French side of things and how France has been domestically responding to the crisis unfolding the last few weeks. Alongside the UK, obviously, France has been at the forefront of the pushback against Trump. We've covered it many times in this podcast. Macron gave a very firm speech on national television last week. And just a couple of days ago, French Senator Claude Maluret gave a powerful speech at the French Parliament that has since gone viral. And I quote him, he said one of his most interesting lines was, "Trump is Nero while Washington burns." We'll post the translation to this speech in the show notes. So, Marion, can you tell us what the mood is in France at the moment? And how has Macron's position been received by the French public?
Yes, of course. And I would just caveat my response by saying that this is mostly from anecdotal evidence and conversations we have with sources and people, because we have very little polling data. All of these events happen in quick succession, so it's hard to have a comprehensive picture. But what I can say for sure is that there was a tipping point for the French public opinion, I think, which was the Trump-Zelensky Oval Office scene, which was widely broadcasted here. It was prime material for primetime TV, and it really marked the minds of the French people. And it's no coincidence, I think, that Macron spoke last week on TV. There was growing anxiety among the French after that sequence and what they saw covered in the press. Suddenly, the conflict in Ukraine and the US growing alignment with Russia was very concrete and very real in front of them. So I think in that sense, Macron's speech was well received. It was needed. The French needed to be reassured. But no, of course, the hard work begins. And what the difficulties lying ahead are the big budget choices. France and Macron has pledged to increase defense spending. It's a huge sum that they will need to find if they're going to increase their defense spending to 3.5% of GDP. As Macron discussed, it's roughly like 30 billion euros. That is huge. France is just out of a debt crisis, and we are going to see very strong and controversial debates about where to find that money.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the different positions we find on the French political spectrum, and especially Le Pen, who's obviously a big force on the French political landscape in parliament? She's likely to become the next president. And she historically has had quite close tie to Russia. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there has been some conversation about who funds and where does she find the money to fund her political campaigns. So what has been her position towards Putin, and has it evolved in the last few weeks, and how has she responded to Macron's speech and position?
Yes, of course, the development in Ukraine are a difficulty for Le Pen's party, who historically has had ties with Russia, as you just highlighted. She's trying to walk a fine thread in her position. She reacted shortly after the Trump-Zelensky meeting and after Trump's comments. And basically the position she has is she's saying Trump is defending his country's interests. We should look after ours. And she's going after Macron for his European outreach. Essentially, her position is that France should take care of themselves and should stand by their independent defense, and any move to protect Europe with the French nuclear umbrella are things that she strongly condemns. In a recent interview to newspaper Le Figaro, she also really downplayed the Russian threat to France. She's saying essentially this is not the first risk for our country, and Macron is over-dramatizing the whole situation. Of course, Marine Le Pen's position matters domestically because her party and their allies hold roughly a third of the seat in the country's National Assembly at the moment. So any parliamentary debate that is being held on defense spending, on these sort of things, she will be able to weigh in on. But it also matters internationally because other countries in Europe are very cognizant of the fact that Le Pen could rule the country after Macron, that she's been growing in terms of support. So any kind of commitment that Macron takes now is also looked at through a lens of, what if Le Pen wins the next one?
Yeah, and it's interesting because you've got Le Pen, who's for increased military spending, but more of an absolutely French, like almost not isolationist, but in keeping with the French military doctrine of having autonomy and independence and doing its own thing. And then Macron is more going for something that's very pro-European. And then on the left side of the political spectrum, they're kind of split, aren't they? There's like a side of there's a bit of a fracture there of one side of the left wing of the political spectrum agreeing with Macron, and then the left of the left, who also has had quite a softer stance towards Putin since ever and since the beginning of the war, and who tend to be more anti-NATO, anti-militaristic and anti-American, have been really disagreeing with Macron's latest positions. How has that played out? And do you think this like anti-militaristic position has found some echo in French society?
I mean, I think it's both ends of the spectrum, so the far left and the far right are against Macron on this, perhaps unsurprisingly. What really matters now is where Macron's coalition is going to find some support if they want to push through increased defense spending. And there are only two solutions, really. It's either with the far right, not sure it's happening, or like with a kind of moderate left, which is where they found support to pass through the budget with lots of difficulties in the past few months. So in a sense, those are the kind of potential components. I think Macron's position will probably find a large echo within the broad center, like center-left, center-right, which is very worried about the kind of threat that Russia represents to Europe. It's obviously not being agreed upon by part of the far left and the far right. But then again, the kind of crucial debates are going to happen most likely with the Social Democrats, the Socialists, and the other parties which are more the center-left.
You mentioned the nuclear shield and the perspective that France could offer some sort of nuclear protection to the rest of Europe. That would require some changes in the French constitution. Can you explain to our listeners what the constitution currently allows and what these changes would be? How likely are we to see that happen? It's a very big thing to change the constitution, and a very controversial one as well.
So Macron's position is not that they want to share the nuclear umbrella in the sense of change the decision-making process or actually share some actual nuclear warheads with other countries. It's more that France's doctrine has always been the nuclear force should be used to protect the nation's interest. And Macron is saying, well, the nation's interests include and cover all kind of European interests, that there is an overlap between European interests and French interests. And in that sense, that it's in keeping with existing doctrine to potentially use the French nuclear umbrella to protect Europe. It's a very important nuance because Marine Le Pen has been accusing Macron of essentially the nuclear force that has been built over the years with Europe. And that's not what Macron's government is saying. They're saying we remain sovereign, that we are the ones who will decide whether we push the button, but all sovereignty and all protection has a European dimension, and therefore it makes sense to discuss with our European neighbor on how we can use all French nuclear umbrella to also protect Europe.
Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about Macron's foreign policy doctrine and what he's been trying to do since the beginning of his first term. He's the only head of state that was there during Trump's first presidency. What has been their relationship over the years, and has it evolved? And is that giving him an advantage on the international scene at the moment? It's been portrayed a lot as a bromance. Can you describe a little bit to us what that has been like?
Yes, Macron has been trying to position himself as Trump's buddy, but someone who would still hold his line in key moments. We've seen it in the Oval Office where, for instance, when he shook hands with Trump and they had all of this kind of mimics, we're all friends, but at the same time, he rebuked some of Trump's wrong statements about the EU's support to Ukraine and the US support to Ukraine. So he's trying to have it both ways, have a friendly attitude with Trump. They discussed Trump coming to Paris for Notre Dame, their Eiffel Tower dinner. But at the same time, he's tried to push back against some of the kind of most egregious comments coming out of the White House. In that sense, it's a bit similar to the UK's Keir Starmer, like they're trying to find the right attitude there. It's difficult. I don't know if anyone has like a decisive advantage with Trump at the moment. It's something that is hard to tell. What's certain is that domestically, the current situation, and forgive me for being a bit cynical here, but in terms of politics, is an advantage to Macron. He was very weakened following his defeat at the last parliamentary election in July, and he's getting a bit of wind in his sails lately because he has stepped up, he has engaged in all of this diplomatic fronts that Nicholls was referring to earlier. So he's back on the central stage, which he had to kind of withdraw from lately.
And that's interesting, this idea of him being back in the central stage, because ever since his first term, he's always wanted to play a role on the international scene and have a legacy in terms of foreign affairs and diplomacy. We know he's taken an interest in the Middle East and in Lebanon recently. He's tried to act as a bridge between Putin and Zelensky at the very beginning of the invasion. We all remember the infamous hoodie photo op that went viral, at least in France at the time. So do you think it's a bit cynical to say, but as you said, it's doing him a lot of favors? And do you think it's finally Macron's time to shine? And if so, what is Macron's doctrine and what is Macron's legacy that he's trying to build up at the moment?
I'm not sure we can summarize this in just a few minutes, but what I would say for sure is that Macron has always been a strong advocate of more European integration on defense. And that's something that people give him credit for in the current circumstances. We've written a story about this, but it's clearly a bit of a told you so moment for him, where suddenly French positions on having an independent European defense that he's been pushing for years, where they were met with lots of reluctance, if not a bit of mockery. And now everyone is recognizing that actually makes sense and they're forced to with their back on the wall. So in that sense, I would think his very pro-European stance is being vindicated for sure. But of course, as we've discussed before, the hard work is in front of everyone, including Macron. It's nice to talk about European defense, but you've got to fund it and kind of put your money where your mouth is in this subject as well.
Thank you. And one last question for me, and it's maybe a bit cheeky or a bit cynical, but do you think we could see some rivalry between Macron and Starmer on how to lead this coalition of the willing in this European defense effort?
Yeah, I mean, obviously both sides are saying that a very strong cooperation is needed. The UK and France are the only kind of nuclear power in Europe. They both have significant military and by far the most kind of organized, I would say, in Europe. But at the same time, of course, they both dashed out to Washington the same week. You could see that the visit was unplanned. It took place before Starmer's visit, which was planned. It would be interesting to see if indeed there is a bit of rivalry or if actually they cooperate strongly and divide tasks a bit. Will one play good cop, presumably Starmer, where the other one plays bad cop, presumably Macron, given the long-standing alliance between the UK and the US? It's still an open question at this point. I would say for now, like both are, at least the French side is saying we need the UK, we need to cooperate strongly with them, but we'll see when the hard questions begin, how the dust falls.
Marion, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adélie. Have a very nice day.
Last week, our colleague Roland Oliphant met with Oleksandr Prokudin, the governor of Kherson Oblast. They talked about what it's been like running a frontline region where 70% of the territory is now under Russian control, and of its human cost. Civilians have been relentlessly targeted by a terror campaign that has come to be known as a human safari. Here's their conversation.
Oleksandr Prokudin, you are the governor of Kherson region. Which is a frontline region. It's suffered quite badly. Why don't you first of all just give me a sense of what the situation is like in Kherson right now? What are you dealing with? What is the state of play for ordinary people in Kherson at the moment?
The situation in Kherson region is quite critical. Only 500,000 shells have hit Kherson region for the duration of last 2 years from the moment of the occupation. And since August 2024, the situation got even worse with the drone attacks. Russians drop bombs from the drones at the civilian people, just for those who are waiting for the buses or going to churches or driving with their bicycles, and they take videos of that and put it in their Telegram channels, and they make fun of it, calling it a safari. Compared to the situation before the war, how many people have lived in the territories is 500,000 on the right bank that is deoccupied right now. As of right now, it's 155,000, and in the city itself was 300,000 before the war, and right now only
6,000.
60,000 people from a population of 300,000 before the war. So it's basically emptied. I wanted to ask you about the so-called human safari. We've heard about that. Roughly when did that start, and has it got worse or better? Tell us a bit about that.
Серпня місяця почалось це, і це
This so-called human safari started at August 2024, and it's very hard to protect people from the drone attacks because they are constantly changing frequencies of the drones, and as soon as we find some solution and protect people with some equipment, only a month can come by and they have already changed the frequencies and those equipment are no longer effective. And it's not only the civilian people who are suffering from this, but special services like police and medical staff, because when they hit someone and someone gets injured, and then police and medical ambulance arrive at this place, they hit once again to specifically target those people. Only 23 ambulance cars were destroyed during the last year with that kind of attacks.
допомоги було спалено саме так.
23 ambulances destroyed in those kinds of attacks.
And 40 cars of police and 15 cars.
Firefighters.
Is this just concentrated in Kherson city, or is it all along the bank of the Dnieper?
On all front line, 225 kilometers.
Okay, but the safari, this hunting of civilians is everywhere, not just in the city, or is that a thing that targets Kherson's?
2,000 attacks per week.
Yeah, along the side of the front line.
What do you think is the purpose of this? Because, of course, I mean, targeting Ukrainian military would be one thing. That would be war, right? That's what it is. But what, as far as you understand, what is the purpose of this tactic?
Да, тактика одна.
This tactic is quite clear, and it is to terrorize those people who are living in certain areas where they are planning to come with their military across the river. And it has started exactly at the time where their military commander commanded them to take up some settlements on the right bank, and so they're basically terrorizing people in those settlements when they're planning to cross the river, so that all the people would leave and it would be easier for them to take certain settlements.
Зайти на цю територію.
That's interesting. Are the Russians coming across the river then? Are they raiding the other bank with their soldiers?
Да, вони кожного дня штурмують позиції.
Yes, of course, they're raiding the Dnieper River constantly. At first they were just coming by boats across the river, but it was very fatal for them. And right now what they are doing is approaching the bridges, car bridge and the railway bridge with the armed vehicles to cover those paths and stop logistics from our side and to protect their boats. And then they are using boats to cross the river. But even they understand that these things that they are doing are quite deadly, and it's basically a suicide mission. When they are being sent to raid the river, they are saying goodbyes to their family, and they understand clearly that they are not going to come back.
Їх посилають на цей штурм.
Are they trying to take and hold positions on the river, or are they just raiding and going back? What's the...
Hold.
They want to hold it?
Yes. Їм потрібно зайняти позицію.
Yeah, they're trying to take and hold the position on the right bank of the Dnieper River. That's what we understand, and what we overheard from the conversation, taking over the conversation of the Russian military, is that they need this position as a argument during negotiations, saying that they are present on the right bank.
На переговорах по врегулюванню.
Right, okay. That's... God, I didn't realize that. That leads me on to the question of the negotiations that seem to have started. Where do I even begin? Look, your oblast, your region is half or even more than half occupied by the Russians at the moment.
Yes, 70% of the region is occupied.
If there's a ceasefire, which we seem to be driving towards, if that ceasefire freezes the line in place, that means basically Russia keeps 70% of your region. Basically, whether you say we recognize it or not. How do you feel about that? Is something that you would accept in exchange for peace?
Ні. Ну, в будь-якому ми не погоджуємось з тим.
No, that's not okay with us, at least from the legal standpoint. We cannot agree for Kherson territories, Kherson region to be legally part of Russia. Even if it happens so that there will be a ceasefire and the freezing of the conflict, it is important to still understand that Kherson region should be once again all together under the reigning of Ukraine, and it doesn't matter how long it will take us, either 1 year or 2 years. Maybe we will wait until Putin dies. Maybe it will be longer than that. But we will still try to take back our territory.
В складі України.
I understand that's the position, and that will be the legal position. That will not change. You will always say that. But de facto, if this happens, if this deal that Donald Trump is pushing happens, basically you're going to end up living with a partitioned region. It's very easy for people like me in London or people in Washington or even people in Kiev to talk about that theoretically. This is your region, it's your home. What does that prospect mean to you and to people there when you think about it? Is there a way of living with that?
Таку ситуацію вже переживали на Донбасі і на Луганщині.
Of course, the situation is awful, but we have already gone through similar things during 2014 with Donetsk and Lugansk, when people kept getting further and further from their home, and they were moving out several times. For me personally and for my family, it will be an awful situation because my wife is from left bank, from Henichesk. My children were raised there. I have a home there, and so as many people who live in Kherson region. And morally, it will be a very hard situation for us. But still, there is no way that it's going to stay like this for the whole time.
І протриматись.
Your president is obviously, as we speak, in Washington talking to President Trump. In a way, he's been forced into a very difficult position by the Americans, these threats to withdraw aid. The American position seems to have changed quite dramatically. Do you feel betrayed by the Americans?
No. Я так не думаю.
No, I don't feel betrayed by the Americans because this nation have supported us very strongly throughout the whole war for this past 3 years. And President Trump is elected president by the American people, just like President Zelensky is elected by Ukrainian people, and he represents the support of American people towards Ukraine. And the thing that he is talking right now, what he was talking about, is just a way to escalate the situation. Maybe it was a test for our president. Of course, it is to get the best possible conditions for the US. And I think that President Zelensky have shown us that he will not budge under that kind of statement, and he will negotiate the best conditions for Ukraine. I have seen the ratings from the American people of how they are supportive of Ukraine. So it is basically 47% of people supporting Ukraine to 19 of them supporting Russia. So it's dramatically, it shows how Americans feel really about that.
Щоб на наших також умовах.
Do you think the Europeans are doing enough?
Європі потрібно.
Well, Europeans have to finally wake up because they are not doing what they have to. And if they will stay in this position that they are keeping right now, the war will come to them. Putin will not stop with only just Ukraine. He has more plans, much bigger plans, and we see how they escalated the production of artillery and ammunition in the past couple of years. And this war machine is not just going to stop. As we see this situation, as we see Putin as a terrorist leader, a dictator who is eager to go down in history just like Hitler did. And he will not stop with Ukraine, and he will go even further. And we as Ukrainians who have been fighting him back for the past 3 years, we are ready to teach Europe how to act and what to expect. And we are ready to lead this movement of fighting the Russia and Putin. It's just this is the third country that we are in, and going from country to country, I see that people are not ready for what is coming. They are still living in 1953 and believe that artillery or some armed machines, vehicles are going to stop, or this is what's going to be the main force in the war, but that is not true. The main force will be drones and robots, and will be very technologically advanced war.
Змінилось. Зараз воюють роботами і дронами.
On what you said, you just said, look, Putin doesn't want to stop. He will go for Europe if he can. The question, I suppose, I'm interested in your opinion on, is if we get this ceasefire deal that freezes the line, which President Trump seems to want, that's a deal in which I suppose Kherson would be part of. I suppose it would be like Berlin in the Cold War, right? It would be on the front line, or like South Korea. In Korea, for example, that has lasted for many decades. It worked. Do you think it's possible here? Do you think you could see the line freezing and Russia being stopped where they are now? Do you think it's feasible?
Звичайно, ні. Звичайно, ні.
Definitely, that's not going to be the scenario like in Korea, because this is just a way to take a breather and prepare for the next strike, especially for Russia. That might only even get worse for Europe, because they might think that they have stopped the aggression, but that's not what's going to happen. They're going to relax, and meanwhile Russia will prepare. They will not stop this war machine. The amount of ammunition that they have already producing is enormous, and it will only increase. And they will prepare for the next strike that is going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years. And if it happens so, and the next blow would be much bigger, and Ukraine would fall and would be taken by Russia, and Ukrainian armies, Ukrainian military will be forced to fight with the Russian armies against the whole world. And this is to the most advanced armies in the world. They will be unstoppable.
Найкращі світу будуть воювати в Європі.
Okay, so you don't see a future for Kherson, where Kherson is like West Berlin, and it's looking out over that river towards occupied Ukraine, and for decades there's Kherson, and it's getting richer and so on, and you're on the frontier. You don't see that happening.
Все одно стіна впала.
But the wall was destroyed eventually, and as you said, one part will get richer and better, and the other will get poorer and poorer, and with some time we will still be at the left bank of the river.
Ось на лівий берег.
Tell us a bit about what brought you to Britain, because I know you've been up in Lincolnshire. What on earth brings the governor of Kherson region to Lincolnshire, of all places?
Єдина
So the main goal of coming us here was to sign an MOU with the Lincolnshire region. So it's a memorandum of cooperation between Kherson region and the county of Lincolnshire. And our regions are very similar to each other. They are the biggest in farm industry and the best, like Kherson was before the war. And we have the ports as well as the Lincolnshire does. So we share a lot of similarities, and the people here are just so open and so heartwarming. We were met with open minds and open hearts. We have talked with Councillor Colin Davey during the signing of the MOU, and we discussed our plans for the future. And we will start from the little projects and then move on to the bigger ones for the investments, of course, when the war is over. And yeah, but of course the main thing, the core of this cooperation is moral support, to show our people that they are not alone. For Kherson, from people of Kherson to understand that somewhere overseas people of Lincolnshire support them with the whole heart, and we are not alone in this fight.
Навіть на такому рівні, як регіон з регіону.
Does that mean you are already thinking about the post-war reconstruction, about the ceasefire and what comes next?
Без мрії і без планів на майбутнє вони ніколи не стануться, тому що ми зараз не тільки
thinking about the future, because if you don't have a dream, if you don't have a plan, you will get nowhere. And we're not only working with Great Britain and with Lincolnshire. We have already a long-lasting cooperation with the German region, which is called Schleswig-Holstein, and in a duration of over a year, they have supported us immensely. Our children are going there to study and to spend their vacations. They have provided us with the solar panels to equip our critical infrastructure and hospitals. Right now they are already collecting stuff to equip our underground shelters in schools, so they have helped us so much. Just like before coming to Great Britain, we were signing an MOU with the region of Liguria, which is in Italy. And this support and cooperation that we are establishing, we're definitely going to be a long-lasting one. We are also planning to sign an MOU with one state of in the USA and a province in Canada. And those cooperations are going to have a lot of impact after the war, because our region is very favorable for the investments. We have a lot of sunlight, which is perfect for the green energy. We have a cheap labor force. We can waiver the taxation for the green energy, for the energy and for the land, which makes it perfect place for investment.
Енергія, у нас дешевий робоча сила, електроенергія, і ми можемо звільняти від податків на землю і екологію. Головне взагалі в усьому цьому, що ми
And it's important that we see this cooperation as a two-way street. So we're not only taking something from them, we are also can give something to them. For example, for our region, it is our experience. We have a bright example with the hospital in Kiel in Germany. We have signed an MOU between two of our hospitals, and they have a budget compared to budgets of 3 regions in Ukraine, and our budget is of our hospital is so much less, and still we are conducting more heart operations per year than they are doing. It's like twice as much. We are doing twice as much, and our doctors will be coming there and not only studying how to do stuff, but also teaching them how to be more effective.
Вони такі очі відкривають, думають, як це взагалі можливо. Вони 300 операцій роблять на рік.
Thank you. There's a particular aspect to the agricultural sector in Kherson that we wanted to ask you about, actually. As a matter of fact, the deputy ambassador here, the Ukrainian deputy ambassador, gave us a bottle of wine from Kherson region. Tell us about the wine industry in Kherson. What kind of a condition is it in? How much of it still exists? Did you lose a lot on the other bank? Tell us about your wine.
Виноробство. Зараз всі у нас
Our region in general is very popular for its wineries because of the specific geographical position. So the Dnieper hills are very like to those that are in Crimea, and we get as much sun as in Crimea. So the weather is very favorable. We have a big winery, which is we have several big wineries, as well as the local craft products. But the most popular one, it is on the right bank, but it is completely destroyed, and Russians have robbed it. They were working on Italian equipment, but using our grapes. This winery is called the Prince of Trubetsky, and there is so few bottles left of this wine that it's considered a treasure. But I believe that everything will be restored. Just the wineries and the cognac. The cognac of Tavria, which is also very, very popular, but unfortunately occupied and destroyed. Everything will be restored, and I believe that our wines will win all the international awards just like they used to.
Завод Таврія, який на тому боці, також розграблений, але все відновимо.
And this Prince Trubetskoy, did you say? You said that's on the right bank? On the Ukrainian-held bank. So is that right on the river? Is that close to where the drones are striking and stuff? Is that why it's been destroyed? So the vineyards can't be worked at the moment?
Ну так. Але там такі погреби.
Yes, it's not operable right now, but they have so long and big basements that they survived during the Second World War, so I think they will survive this as well.
Першу і Другу світову.
Alexander, thank you very much. I suppose the last thing to think about, really. I suppose you've just done a tour of Lithuania. Now you're here. It's about investment. Is that because you can feel that the end is in sight, that the war is about to finish, and therefore you need to? Now is the moment to tell investors it's time to get ready.
Я думаю, що кінця не буде такого швидкого, як ми хочемо.
I don't think that the war is going to end as soon as we are hoping for. But right now, even there will be a ceasefire and a freezing of the front line. We have the best conditions right now that we can propose to investors for them to enter the region, including the taxation waiver and waiver of the electric taxes and stuff like that. So this is the best conditions they can get.
Надалі шансу не буде.
Is there anything I haven't asked? Is there anything you want to say?
The main message is to avoid the war, you have to be prepared for the war.
Готуватись до війни.
Thank you very much.
And finally, over the weekend, Special Correspondent Hayley Dixon was able to publish her year-long investigation into Jan Marsalek. Jan Marsalek was once the star of Germany's fintech scene, a young CEO full of promise, until his company went bankrupt and he went on the run, unheard of, for 3 years. His name reappeared for the first time in a trial here in the UK, where several people were on the stand for spying on the UK for Russia. And Jan Marsalek? Well, he ran the spy ring. How and when did he become a Russian agent? Where has he been these past 3 years? Hayley has spent months looking into it, and she's publishing several stories this week. We on the podcast desk have been working with her on a 3-part documentary. We're going to play for you the intro to the first episode, and we'll post a link to both her stories and to the documentary in the show notes so you can go and listen to the rest. Don't miss it.
It's an unassuming guest house in the seaside town of Great Yarmouth, but it's no holiday home. There are boxes piled up in every room, with tech equipment and bags full of cables. There are metal storage shelves across the walls. For almost 3 years, behind its mundane facade, a group of Bulgarians have been running a spy ring for Russia. And in February 2023, after an investigation, the police finally cracks down.
5 Bulgarian nationals appeared in court today suspected of spying for Russia.
They were charged with conspiracy to conduct espionage.
Prosecutions for espionage in British courts are extremely rare. Usually, spies get put on a plane and expelled from the country. This case, however, is different. These aren't Russians spying for the motherland. They are EU citizens, carrying out the orders of the Russian state on British soil. And because they were plotting in the UK, they will be prosecuted here.
The defendants, all Bulgarian nationals, were held in February and have been remanded in custody since. Now, it is alleged they were working for the Russian security services.
The story made front-page news, and in September 2023, the case opened at Westminster Magistrates. The press gathered in a hushed courtroom to hear the charges. The Bulgarians joined via video link from their prisons, standing and speaking only to confirm their names and dates of birth. As they sat down, the prosecutor began outlining the case against them. Journalists furiously scribbling shorthand to try and get down every word. These charges were classed as terrorism offences, she said. She described how the allegations of kidnapping and surveillance were so serious they would have to be referred to one of Britain's most senior judges. And then she dropped a bombshell. The tasker from Moscow was a man whose name was known by many in the courtroom. Jan Marsalek. But he wasn't known as a spy. He had been the boss at one of Germany's most successful tech firms. And he'd allegedly been behind one of the country's biggest financial scandals. In 2020, he went on the run. And until that day in Westminster, he had not been heard from for 3 years. Interpol had been searching for him. The press across Europe had been searching for him. No one knew if he was even alive. Until that day, when it became clear that he had been giving orders on behalf of the Kremlin. That trial that brought Marsalek back into the limelight has concluded this week after a 2-year-long court battle. So I've been trying to understand Jan Marsalek's unusual life. A whiz kid from a tiny Austrian town, who first was allegedly Germany's biggest white-collar criminal, and who ended up as a Russian operative, plotting surveillance, kidnappings and disinformation campaigns in the UK and across the world.
Because it had everything that you need for a gangster movie or gangster thriller. It has like intelligence services, organized crime, money laundering and digital finance.
So who is Jan Marsalek? How did he use his wealth and connections to join the world of intelligence?
It seems like a Shakespearean tragedy. It really does.
I'm Hayley Dixon, special correspondent at The Telegraph, and I've been tracing Jan Marsalek from the boardroom to the courtroom. And this is The Daily Tea Investigates, the tech boss who was Russia's secret spy. Episode 1, All Roads Lead to Moscow.
And now let's go to our final thoughts. Dom, do you want to take it up from here?
My final thought, Adélie, is a Vance has been seen in Ukraine. Not JD. He doesn't need to go there to actually get his news, does he? He gets it all from TV, as we now know. But this is his cousin. So Nate Vance, a former US Marine, has reportedly spent 3 years fighting for Ukraine. He came back or went back to the US in January. He's accused his cousin of ambushing President Zelensky in that Oval Office encounter and said, Donald Trump and my cousin clearly believe they can placate Vladimir Putin. They are wrong. The Russians are not about to forget our support for Ukraine. He was speaking to Le Figaro. He said that his cousin J.D. Vance and Donald Trump had turned America into Putin's useful idiots. Now, he apparently went to Ukraine 3 weeks after the start of the full-scale invasion and reportedly fought as part of the Da Vinci Wolves battalion. He said, being your family doesn't mean I'm going to accept you killing my comrades. So interesting to hear his comments. He says he's tried to get in touch with his cousin J.D. Vance, but has not had a reply. Might make Christmas a little bit awkward.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Knowles. To support our work and to stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and in those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website, where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciated this podcast, please consider following Ukraine the latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. And please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph on X, formerly known as Twitter, so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We do continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You can find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you are listening from around the world. Ukraine, the latest, was today produced by Rachel Porter. Executive producers are Frances Durnley, Louisa Wells, and David Knowles.